Number, the poor black girl only. Had $5 for dinner, the single dad CEO at the next table watched her, and the golden lights of the upscale restaurant cast shadows that seemed to dance across crystal glasses and silver cutlery. At a corner table, a young black woman named Callista Brown, just 24 years old, sat alone, her fingers nervously clutching a worn $5 bill. She studied the menu with trembling hands, searching for the cheapest item she could order. The waitstaff glanced her way with barely concealed disdain, while other patrons whispered behind manicured hands. At the adjacent table, a tall man in an impeccable black suit watched every movement with penetrating gray-blue eyes. Nathan Carter, 36 years old, CEO and single father, whose steady gaze held something deeper than mere curiosity. This brief moment would forever alter the course of their lives. Callista Brown had never intended to find herself in such an establishment. Life had carved its hardships into her very soul, though she carried herself with a dignity that poverty could never strip away. She had grown up in the forgotten corners of the city, where dreams were luxuries and survival was the only currency that mattered. Her father had passed when she was barely 7, leaving behind memories of warm laughter and calloused hands that had worked tirelessly to provide. Her mother, Grace, had fought valiantly against illness for years, each medical bill another weight added to shoulders already bearing too much. The young woman had once harbored dreams of becoming a designer. She possessed a natural eye for beauty, could see potential in discarded fabrics and transform them into something extraordinary. Her professors at the community college had praised her talent, encouraged her to transfer to a prestigious art school. But dreams, she learned, required money that didn't exist in her world. When her mother's condition worsened during Callista's sophomore year, the choice was no choice at all. She withdrew from school, took jobs waiting tables and cleaning offices, pouring every cent into medications and treatments that ultimately couldn't save the woman who had given her everything. Now, 6 months after her mother's passing, Callista wore a dress she had carefully pressed that morning. Its pastel blue fabric faded from too many washes but maintained with meticulous care. Her natural curls were pulled back in a simple style, and her worn flats had been cleaned until they almost looked presentable. She had come to this restaurant not by choice, but by obligation. A potential employer had suggested meeting here to discuss a position as a personal assistant. The woman had never shown up, leaving Callista sitting alone for 40 minutes before pride prevented her from waiting any longer. Nathan Carter occupied his table with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. His presence seemed to expand beyond his considerable frame, filling space with an energy that made others instinctively step aside. The financial press had dubbed him the Iron Man of Tech, a moniker that captured his reputation for ruthless efficiency but missed the profound loneliness that haunted his nights. His company, Carter Technologies, had revolutionized data security, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Yet all the success felt hollow when he returned each evening to a house that echoed with absence. 3 years had passed since the accident that claimed his wife, Rebecca. A drunk driver had crossed the median on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and in seconds, his daughter Audrey had lost her mother, and he had lost the woman who had made him believe in forever. Since then, he had constructed walls around his heart as impenetrable as the encryption his company created. Women pursued him for his wealth, his status, his power. But none saw the man who still kept his wife's coffee mug on the kitchen counter, or who spent hours learning to braid hair from online tutorials so Audrey wouldn't feel different from her classmates. His daughter was his universe now, the only pure thing in a world that had grown increasingly transactional. At 7 years old, Audrey possessed her mother's gentle spirit and an intuition that seemed to see through adult pretenses. She had insisted on joining him for dinner tonight, claiming she was old enough for fancy restaurants. Nathan had reluctantly agreed, unable to resist her earnest blue eyes. The child sat beside him now, her blonde hair tied in ribbons, quietly coloring in a small notebook while occasionally observing the room with curious intelligence. The restaurant itself was a testament to excess marble floors polished to mirror perfection, chandeliers that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and a wine list that required its own leather-bound volume. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than authenticity, where conversations revolved around stock portfolios and vacation homes. Nathan had grown to despise these spaces, even as business required his presence in them. He had chosen this particular table in the corner to avoid the worst of the pretension, seeking relative peace to share a meal with his daughter. The moment that would change everything began with a simple gesture. Callista had finally decided on a house salad, the least expensive item that could pass for a meal, when Audrey's coloring pencil rolled from her table. The little girl slipped from her chair to retrieve it, and in doing so, caught Callista's eye. For a heartbeat, the child's innocent gaze met the young woman's weary one, and Audrey smiled, not the polite, practiced smile of a child trained in social graces, but a genuine, warm expression of human connection. Callista found herself smiling back, the first real smile that had crossed her face in weeks. There was something healing in that momentary exchange, a reminder that kindness still existed in unexpected places. Audrey retrieved her pencil but lingered for a moment, studying Callista with the unabashed curiosity of childhood. "Your dress is pretty," the child said softly, "blue like the sky after rain." The compliment, so pure and unexpected, nearly brought tears to Callista's eyes. Before she could respond, Nathan's voice, deep and controlled, called his daughter back. "Audrey, don't bother the lady." But as he spoke, his gaze lifted to meet Callista's, and something indefinable passed between them. He saw not a woman out of place, but someone maintaining dignity despite obvious discomfort. She saw not another wealthy stranger, but a father's protective concern, mixed with something else, perhaps recognition of a kindred loneliness. "She's not bothering me at all," Callista replied, her voice carrying a strength that surprised her. "She's lovely." Nathan nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Audrey beamed and returned to her seat, but not before waving goodbye with the enthusiasm only children possess. The interaction lasted mere seconds, yet it created ripples that would expand far beyond this moment. When the waiter arrived at Callista's table, his expression was a study in barely professional disdain. He was young, perhaps 25, with slicked-back hair and a narrow face that seemed designed for looking down at others. His name tag read Marcus, and he wielded his position with the petty authority of someone who derived power from others' discomfort. "Have you decided?" he asked, his tone implying she was wasting valuable time. "The house salad, please," Callista said quietly, placing the menu down with steady hands despite her inner turmoil. Marcus's eyebrow arched slightly. "Just the salad? Nothing to drink? Perhaps you'd prefer to look at the menu again? We do have a minimum per table during peak hours." The words were professionally phrased, but the implication was clear. Callista felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she maintained eye contact. "The salad will be fine, thank you. And water." As Marcus departed with obvious displeasure, whispers began to circulate among nearby tables. A woman in diamonds leaned toward her companion, not bothering to lower her voice sufficiently. "Can you imagine? Coming to a place like this and ordering just a salad? Some people have no sense of propriety." Her companion, a man whose watch probably cost more than Callista had earned in the past year, chuckled, probably hoping to catch a wealthy man's attention. They all have the same playbook. Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed at whatever remained of Callista's pride. She kept her eyes fixed on the table's surface, studying the grain of the wood as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Her hands remained folded in her lap, though they trembled slightly despite her efforts at control. Nathan heard every word, and something dark stirred within him. He had witnessed cruelty in boardrooms, had participated in corporate battles that destroyed livelihoods, but there was something particularly vicious about this casual humiliation of someone who had done nothing wrong except exist in a space others deemed she didn't deserve. When Marcus returned with the salad, he placed it before Callista with exaggerated care, as if serving a child playing dress-up. "Your salad, miss. That will be $12. Will you be paying now, or—" He let the question hang, the implication clear that he doubted her ability to pay at all. Callista's hand moved to her purse, where the $5 bill waited. She had thought it would be enough for something small, had not anticipated the restaurant's prices. The realization that she couldn't even afford the salad she'd ordered was a humiliation beyond words. She opened her purse slowly, her mind racing for a solution that wouldn't exist. "Actually," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've just remembered I have somewhere to be." She started to rise, leaving the untouched salad, when a presence materialized beside her table. Nathan stood there, his impressive height making Marcus step back instinctively. His expression was pleasant, professional, but something in his eyes made the waiter's smirk falter. "Excuse me," Nathan said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. There seems to be a misunderstanding. This lady is my guest. Her meal should be added to my tab. Callista's eyes widened, and she immediately began to protest. No, that's not necessary. But Audrey had followed her father, and the child's small hand reached out to touch Callista's arm. Please eat with us, she said with the simple sincerity that only children possess. Daddy's table is too big for just 2 people. The invitation, delivered with such innocent earnestness, cut through all social pretense. Nathan gestured toward their table, his expression softening as he looked at his daughter, then at Callista. Audrey's right. We'd be honored if you'd join us. Marcus stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as he processed this unexpected development. The whispers at nearby tables shifted in tone, confusion replacing mockery. The woman in diamonds looked particularly affronted, as if the social order had been violated. Callista wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to maintain her dignity, to walk away rather than accept what felt like charity. But Audrey's hopeful face and Nathan's steady gaze, which somehow conveyed respect rather than pity, made her hesitate. I couldn't impose, she said softly. You wouldn't be, Nathan replied. Sometimes the best conversations happen unexpectedly. Besides, he added with a slight smile, Audrey's already decided. And I learned long ago that arguing with her when she's made up her mind is futile. Despite everything, Callista found herself almost smiling. She looked down at Audrey, who was practically bouncing with excitement, and felt her resistance crumble. Well, if you're certain, we are, Audrey declared with authority beyond her years, taking Callista's hand and leading her to their table. As they settled into their new arrangement, Nathan dismissed Marcus with a look that suggested future conversations about service standards. He pulled out a chair for Callista, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed natural rather than performative. The table, set for 2, was quickly adjusted by a different waiter who appeared with remarkable speed and efficiency. I'm Nathan, he said once they were seated, extending his hand across the table. And you've met my daughter, Audrey. Callista, she replied, accepting the handshake. His grip was firm but not overwhelming, warm but brief. That's a pretty name, Audrey chimed in, already resuming her coloring but clearly listening. Like music. The child's observation broke any remaining tension, and Callista found herself genuinely laughing for the first time in months. Thank you. My mother loved unique names. Said they gave people something to live up to. Wise woman, Nathan observed, and something in his tone suggested he understood the past tense's weight. They ordered properly this time, Nathan insisting she choose whatever she wanted, deflecting her protests with a grace that preserved her dignity. When she selected modestly anyway, he didn't press, understanding that pride had its own requirements. Audrey ordered chicken fingers with the authority of someone who knew exactly what she wanted, making both adults smile. As they waited for their food, conversation flowed with surprising ease. Nathan asked about her interests, listening with genuine attention when she mentioned her past studies in design. He shared carefully edited stories about Audrey's adventures in first grade, the child adding enthusiastic corrections and elaborations. They discussed books, finding common ground in shared favorites, and debated whether rain was melancholy or peaceful, with Audrey insisting it was both. For the first time since Rebecca's death, Nathan found himself genuinely engaged in conversation with a woman who didn't seem to be calculating his net worth or planning their future wedding. Callista spoke with intelligence and wit, her observations sharp but never cruel. When she laughed at one of Audrey's jokes, it was real, not the practiced sound he'd grown accustomed to hearing. You mentioned you studied design, Nathan said as their entrees arrived. What kind? Callista hesitated, then decided on honesty. Fashion, primarily, though I was interested in interior spaces too. I had this theory that clothing and living spaces serve the same purpose. They're both about creating environments where people can be their authentic selves. That's fascinating, Nathan replied, and meant it. Most people think of fashion as masks, not authenticity. It can be both, Callista said, warming to the subject. Sometimes we need masks to find ourselves. Sometimes the mask becomes who we are. The key is choosing consciously rather than letting others choose for us. Audrey looked up from her chicken fingers, sauce dotting her chin. Is that why you made your dress prettier? Daddy, look. She fixed the flowers on it herself, You can see if you look close. Both adults looked down at Callista's dress, where, indeed, careful stitching had added small embroidered flowers along the hem, transforming something plain into something unique. Callista flushed slightly, but Nathan's expression showed genuine appreciation. "That's remarkable work," he said. "The attention to detail is extraordinary." "It was my mother's dress," Callista admitted quietly. "After she passed, I wanted to keep something of her but make it mine too. She always said beauty could be found anywhere if you knew how to look." The weight of loss settled over the table, a shared understanding that required no words. Nathan's hand moved unconsciously to his wedding ring, which he still wore despite the years. Audrey, with the intuition children possess about emotional currents, reached over and patted Callista's hand. "My mommy went to heaven too," she said simply. "Daddy says she watches us and sends signs when we need them. Maybe our mommies are friends now." Callista's eyes glistened, but she managed to smile. "I think you're right. They're probably having tea together right now, watching us and making sure we're okay." Nathan watched this exchange with a tightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. His daughter rarely spoke about Rebecca to strangers, had learned to protect that loss carefully. That she had chosen to share it with Callista spoke volumes. The rest of the meal passed in a warm bubble that seemed to exclude the rest of the restaurant. They discovered shared loves of old jazz, debated whether chocolate or vanilla was the superior ice cream flavor with Audrey moderating, and found themselves laughing over the absurdity of modern art prices. Nathan revealed nothing about his wealth or position, presenting himself simply as a father who worked in technology. Callista spoke about her current job search with determination rather than desperation, framing it as opportunity rather than necessity. When the check arrived, Nathan handled it discreetly, but Callista noticed the waiter's suddenly obsequious manner. She caught a glimpse of the total and felt her stomach drop. The meal cost more than she made in a week. The reality of the gulf between their worlds crashed back over her. "I should go," she said softly, beginning to gather herself. "Thank you for dinner. It was incredibly kind of you both." "Will we see you again?" Audrey asked, and the hope in her voice was almost painful. Callista hesitated, looking between father and daughter. Nathan's expression was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he was waiting for her answer with more interest than casual courtesy would require. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I'll remember tonight always." Nathan reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, but not the one that identified him as CEO. This one simply had his first name and a phone number. "If you ever need anything," he said, offering it to her. "A reference for your job search, or just someone to talk to about design theories." She accepted the card with fingers that trembled slightly. Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary, an entire conversation passing silently between them. Then Callista bent down and hugged Audrey gently, whispered something in the child's ear that made her giggle, and walked away with her head held high. Nathan watched her go, feeling something shift inside him that he wasn't ready to examine. Audrey tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, she's like the princesses in my books. The ones who don't know they're princesses yet." Out of the mouths of babes, Nathan thought, and found himself hoping this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed. The next few days passed in a blur for Callista. She went to job interviews, filled out applications, and tried not to think about the evening at the restaurant. The business card Nathan had given her remained in her purse, pulled out occasionally, and studied as if it might reveal secrets. She had Googled his first name along with technology, but found thousands of results. Without a last name, he remained a mystery, just a kind stranger who had salvaged her dignity on a difficult night. What she didn't know was that Nathan had already set events in motion. He had contacted Marcus's manager, not to complain, but to discuss the importance of treating all patrons with respect. He had also made discreet inquiries through his network about entry-level positions in design firms, though he was careful not to seem too interested. His assistant had noticed his distraction, the way he would stare out his office window instead of focusing on quarterly reports. On the fourth day after their meeting, Callista's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. She had just been rejected from another position overqualified for entry-level, underqualified for anything higher, and found herself sitting on a park bench, fighting tears of frustration. The weight of her mother's medical debt, the rent that was coming due, the impossibility of climbing out of the hole poverty had dug for her, it all felt crushing. Her phone rang, displaying an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept. "Hello? Miss Brown?" Callista? The voice was professional, female, efficient. I'm calling from Design Collaborative. We received your resume and would like to discuss a position that's just opened up. Would you be available for an interview tomorrow? Callista's heart leaped. Design Collaborative was one of the city's most prestigious firms. She had applied months ago and never heard back. Yes, absolutely. What time? After arranging the details, Callista hung up and allowed herself a moment of hope. She didn't know that Nathan had a contact on Design Collaborative's board, or that he had simply mentioned that he'd met a talented young designer who deserved a chance. He had been careful to make no promises, apply no pressure, simply plant a seed and let merit do the rest. The interview went better than Callista could have imagined. The creative director, a woman named Patricia Hoffman, seemed genuinely impressed with her portfolio, especially the pieces that incorporated recycled materials and sustainable practices. They discussed her vision, her interrupted education, her determination to succeed despite obstacles. By the end, Patricia was smiling. "We'd like to offer you a position as a junior designer," she said. "The salary isn't enormous, but there's room for growth, and we provide educational support if you want to complete your degree." Callista accepted immediately, tears of relief threatening to spill over. Finally, something was going right. That evening, she pulled out Nathan's card and stared at it for a long moment. Should she call and share the news? Would that be presumptuous? Before she could overthink it further, she typed out a simple text. "Got a job today at Design Collaborative. Thank you for the encouragement. Hope Audrey is well, Callista." Nathan's response came within minutes. "Congratulations. That's wonderful news. Audrey will be thrilled. We're celebrating with ice cream if you'd like to join us." Central Park, near the boat pond. She hesitated. Meeting for dinner was one thing, but this felt more personal, more like accepting a place in their lives. Yet the thought of Audrey's smile, of Nathan's quiet presence, drew her irresistibly. She found them by the pond, Audrey feeding ducks despite the posted signs discouraging it, Nathan watching with indulgent affection. When Audrey spotted her, she ran over with arms outstretched. "Callista, Daddy said you got a job. Are you going to make pretty dresses?" Eventually, Callista laughed, accepting the child's enthusiastic hug. "Right now, I'll probably be getting coffee and learning everything I can." "Everyone starts somewhere," Nathan said, approaching with a slight smile. "Congratulations, Design Collaborative is lucky to have you." They walked together as the sun set, Audrey between them, chattering about school and friends and her latest art project. It felt natural, comfortable, like pieces of a puzzle finding their places. Other people passed them and smiled, seeing what appeared to be a family enjoying an evening stroll. Neither Nathan nor Callista corrected the assumption, though both were acutely aware of it. As darkness began to fall and Audrey's energy finally waned, Nathan scooped his daughter into his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, eyes drooping. "She really likes you," he said quietly to Callista. "She doesn't warm up to people easily anymore, not since." "I understand," Callista replied softly. "Loss changes us, makes us more careful with our hearts." "But sometimes," Nathan said, meeting her eyes, being too careful means missing out on something extraordinary. The weight of his words hung between them, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Callista felt the pull, the temptation to step closer, to see where this path might lead. But the rational part of her mind whispered warnings about the differences between them, the complications that would inevitably arise. "I should go," she said, though every fiber of her being wanted to stay. "Thank you for the ice cream and for everything." Nathan nodded, understanding her caution even as disappointment flickered across his features. "Can we do this again? Audrey would love to hear about your first day at work." "I'd like that," Callista admitted, and meant it. As she walked away, she didn't notice the man with the camera who had been watching them from behind a tree. A freelance photographer always looking for the next story, he had recognized Nathan Carter immediately. The billionaire CEO, notoriously private since his wife's death, out with an unknown woman and his daughter. This was the kind of exclusive that paid rent for months. The first Callista knew of the photographer was when she arrived at work 3 days later to find her coworkers huddled around a computer screen. They scattered when they saw her, but not before she caught sight of the headline, "Mystery Woman Captures Heart of Billionaire Widower." The article was accompanied by photos from the park, Nathan lifting Audrey, Callista laughing at something the child had said, the three of them walking together in perfect silhouette against the sunset. They looked like a family. They looked happy. But the article's tone was anything but celebratory. It speculated about Callista's motives, referencing her modest clothing and suggesting she was a gold digger who had targeted a grieving widower. It mentioned Nathan's wealth in detail, his company's value, the estate he owned, the fortune Audrey stood to inherit. It painted Callista as a calculating opportunist who had used a child to get close to billions. Patricia Hoffman called Callista into her office that morning, her expression concerned. "I need to ask you something directly. Did you know who Nathan Carter was when you applied here?" Callista's confusion was genuine. "Nathan Carter? The man from the park? I don't understand." Patricia turned her computer screen around, showing a corporate photo of Nathan from the Financial Times. Nathan Carter, CEO of Carter Technologies, worth approximately $8 billion. One of our board members mentioned he'd heard good things about you, but swore you'd earned this position on merit. Was he wrong? The floor seemed to drop away beneath Callista's feet. $8 billion. The kind man who had bought her dinner, who had given her his personal card, who walked in the park with his daughter. He wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the richest men in the country. "I had no idea," she whispered, sinking into a chair. "He said he worked in technology. I would never." Patricia studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. Your work speaks for itself. But Callista, this attention is going to follow you now. The media, the speculation, are you prepared for that?" Was she? Callista thought about Audrey's trusting smile, Nathan's quiet kindness. Then she thought about the article's cruel insinuations, the way her coworkers had looked at her. "I don't know," she answered honestly. The next few days were torture. Photographers appeared outside her apartment building. Her neighbors whispered and pointed. Social media accounts she'd forgotten existed were suddenly flooded with messages, some supportive, most viciously critical. Women accused her of using her looks to manipulate a grieving man. Men offered to rescue her from poverty in exchange for favors that made her skin crawl. She didn't contact Nathan. What would she say? That she'd been too ignorant to recognize one of the country's most successful CEOs? That she was drowning in attention she'd never sought? That despite everything, she missed the simple connection they'd shared before money complicated everything? Nathan, meanwhile, was dealing with his own storm. His board of directors expressed concern about his judgment. His former mother-in-law called, tearfully asking if he was replacing Rebecca. Business associates made crude jokes about him sampling from a different menu. The racism was subtle but present, hidden behind concerns about compatibility and different worlds. But worst of all was Audrey's confusion. She had seen the photos on her tablet before Nathan could shield her, had read comments calling Callista names she didn't understand. "Why are people being mean about Callista?" she asked at breakfast, her eyes troubled. "She's nice. She makes you smile." Nathan realized then what he had to do. Not for the board, not for public opinion, but for his daughter and for the woman who had brought light back into their lives without even trying. He arranged for a press conference, ostensibly to discuss a new Carter Technologies initiative. The business media gathered eagerly, expecting product announcements and revenue projections. Instead, Nathan stepped to the podium and delivered something entirely different. "Before we discuss business," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I want to address the speculation about my personal life. Yes, I recently met someone remarkable. Her name is Callista Brown, and contrary to the narrative being pushed, she had no idea who I was when we met. She treated me with kindness when she thought I was just another single father. She connected with my daughter when she believed we were an ordinary family." The room erupted with questions, but Nathan raised his hand for silence. The real story isn't about wealth or status. It's about how we treat each other as human beings. Miss Brown was publicly humiliated for the crime of being unable to afford an overpriced meal. She maintained her dignity in the face of cruelty that should shame everyone who participated in it. If my association with her has brought difficulty to her life, then I'm the one who should apologize. He paused, his gaze finding the cameras that would broadcast his words across the internet. "Callista, if you're watching this, I want you to know that Audrey and I value you for exactly who you are. Nothing more, nothing less." Across the city, in her small apartment, Callista watched the press conference on her laptop, tears streaming down her face. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "I'm sorry for everything, but I'm not sorry for meeting you." She typed back with trembling fingers. "Can we talk?" His response was immediate. "Name the place." They met at a small coffee shop in her neighborhood, far from the gleaming towers of his world. Nathan arrived alone, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like the man she'd first met than the billionaire she now knew him to be. He ordered black coffee and waited while she gathered her thoughts. "You should have told me," she said finally. "Would you have had dinner with us if you'd known?" She considered lying, then chose honesty. "No." "Then I'm glad I didn't tell you," he said simply. "Those hours talking with you, watching you with Audrey, feeling normal for the first time in years, they were worth whatever comes next." "What does come next?" Callista asked. "Your world and mine, they don't mix, Nathan. The past week has proven that." "Says who?" He leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. "The same people who thought you didn't deserve to eat in that restaurant? The ones who judge worth by bank accounts instead of character? Why should their opinions matter?" "Because they have power," Callista replied. "They can make life impossible. They already are." Nathan was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but letting his rest near hers. "You're right, they have power, but so do we. The power to choose what matters. The power to define our own story. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple," he countered. "It's just not easy." Before Callista could respond, the coffee shop door chimed, and Audrey burst in, followed by Nathan's apologetic driver. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," the driver said. She insisted. Audrey ran to their table, looking between the two adults with determination beyond her years. "Are you going to be friends again?" Callista's heart melted. She opened her arms, and Audrey flew into them. "We're figuring it out, sweetheart." "Well, figure faster," Audrey said with 7-year-old logic. "I made you something." She produced a crumpled drawing from her pocket, 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. Nathan and Callista looked at the drawing, then at each other. In that moment, the complications seemed to fade. There was just a little girl who had lost her mother, a woman who had lost everything, and a man who had forgotten how to hope, all of them finding something in each other that the world said shouldn't exist. "Okay," Callista said softly, "we'll figure it out." The charity gala was the social event of the season, held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with every prominent figure in New York society in attendance. Nathan had to appear. Carter Technologies was a major sponsor, but he had asked Callista to accompany him to make their first public appearance as a couple. She had resisted initially, knowing what she would face. But Patricia Hoffman had surprised her, offering to help her prepare, even lending her a stunning dress from her own collection, a midnight blue creation that Patricia had designed years earlier. "You're talented, Callista," Patricia had said while helping with alterations. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You've earned your place through skill and determination. That's more than most of them can say." Now, standing at the entrance to the gala, Callista felt her courage falter. Through the glass doors, she could see the glittering crowd, the photographers, the world that had rejected her before they even knew her name. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "We don't have to do this." She looked at him, this man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, offering to walk away from his obligations for her comfort. Then she looked at Audrey, wearing a princess dress and practically vibrating with excitement. "Yes, we do," Callista said, lifting her chin. "I'm not hiding anymore." They entered together, and the room seemed to pause. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned, cameras flashed. Callista kept her eyes forward, her hand in Nathan's, drawing strength from his presence and Audrey's cheerful oblivion to the tension. The whispers started immediately. She caught fragments. Gold digger, social climber, how inappropriate, poor child. Each word was intended to wound, to drive her away. But something had changed in Callista over the past weeks. She had survived poverty, loss, humiliation. These people with their petty judgments couldn't break her. The moment of truth came when Margaret Ashford, the grand dame of New York society and one of Nathan's biggest investors, approached them. She was elegantly dressed, impeccably mannered, and known for her ability to destroy reputations with a single raised eyebrow. "Nathan," she said coolly, then turned to Callista with an expression of barely concealed disdain. "And you must be the young woman causing such a stir." Before Callista could respond, Audrey piped up. "She's Callista. She's teaching me to draw flowers on fabric. Want to see?" The child produced a small handkerchief on which she and Callista had been practicing embroidery. It was clumsy, clearly a child's work, but Margaret's expression softened slightly. "That's lovely, dear," she said to Audrey, then looked back at Callista with calculating eyes. "Tell me, Miss Brown, what exactly are your intentions toward Mr. Carter?" The room seemed to hold its breath. This was the question everyone wanted answered, delivered by the person whose opinion mattered most in their social circle. Callista felt Nathan tense beside her, ready to intervene, but she touched his arm gently, silently asking him to let her handle this. "My intentions," Callista repeated, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed space. "My intention is to be worthy of the trust a 7-year-old girl has placed in me. My intention is to honor the memory of my mother, who taught me that dignity isn't determined by wealth, but by how we treat others. My intention is to build a career based on my own talents and efforts, regardless of who I may or may not be dating." She paused, meeting Margaret's eyes directly. "But I suspect what you're really asking is whether I'm after Nathan's money. The answer is no. I didn't know who he was when we met. I was actually trying to leave because I couldn't afford a $12 salad. If that makes me a gold digger, then your definition needs updating." Someone gasped. No one spoke to Margaret Ashford that way, but Callista wasn't finished. "You know what I find interesting? When wealthy men date models or actresses or socialites who've never worked a day in their lives, no one questions their motives. But a woman who's worked multiple jobs to support her dying mother, who's fighting to build a career from nothing, she must be scheming. The prejudice isn't even subtle." Margaret's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Another voice rose from the crowd. "She's right." Everyone turned to see Richard Hoffman, Patricia's husband and a respected federal judge, stepping forward. "I've watched my wife mentor Miss Brown these past weeks. She arrives first, leaves last, and produces work that rivals our senior designers. Whatever her relationship with Nathan, she's earning her success." Then another voice, from a different corner. "The Carter Foundation received an anonymous donation last week, specifically directed toward our youth design program. It came with a note about giving others the chances we never had. Would a gold digger donate her first paycheck to charity?" Nathan looked at Callista in surprise. She hadn't told him about that. More voices joined in, not all supportive, but enough to shift the atmosphere. The monolithic wall of judgment began to crack. Margaret Ashford studied Callista for a long moment, then did something no one expected. She smiled not warmly, but with what might have been respect. "You have spine, Miss Brown. That's rare these days." She turned to Nathan. "Your wife would have liked her." With that pronouncement, she glided away, leaving shocked silence in her wake. Margaret Ashford had essentially given her blessing. The social tide began to turn. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People who had whispered behind their hands now approached with cautious friendliness. Callista handled each interaction with grace, neither forgetting their earlier cruelty nor rubbing their faces in their change of heart. As the night wound down, Nathan found a quiet moment to pull her onto a balcony overlooking Central Park. The city sparkled below them, full of possibility and challenge in equal measure. "That was extraordinary," he said softly. "You were extraordinary." "I was terrified," Callista admitted, finally allowing her composure to slip. "My knees are still shaking." Nathan stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "You stood up to Margaret Ashford. Most CEOs won't do that." "Someone had to," Callista said. "If not for me, then for the next woman who dares to love above her station." "Love?" Nathan's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes burned with intensity. Callista met his gaze steadily. "Yes, love. Because that's what this is, isn't it? Despite the impossibility of it, despite everything standing against us. I love your daughter's pure heart. I love your dedication to her. I love the man who bought a stranger dinner without expecting anything in return. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Nathan's control finally broke. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the longing of his lonely years, all the hope she had rekindled, all the promise of a future neither had dared imagine. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he whispered. Rebecca would have wanted this. She would have wanted Audrey to have a mother who chose her, who fought for her, who loves her for herself and not her inheritance. "I'm not trying to replace her," Callista said quickly. "No," Nathan agreed. "You're not replacing anyone. You're creating something new, something that's ours." Through the ballroom windows, they could see Audrey teaching a group of elderly society matrons her special twirl. The sight made them both laugh. "She's going to rule the world someday," Callista observed. "With you as her role model, I believe it," Nathan replied. "So what now? We've conquered Margaret Ashford. The press will have a field day with tonight. Your life is about to become even more complicated." Callista considered this, then shrugged with a smile that transformed her face. "Let them come. I've faced worse than gossip columnists. Besides," she added, squeezing his hand, "I have backup now." 6 months later, Design Collaborative's Spring Showcase featured a groundbreaking collection that merged sustainable materials with haute couture aesthetics. The lead designer was Callista Brown, whose rapid rise had become the stuff of industry legend. The collection, inspired by resilience and transformation, featured pieces that could be adjusted and transformed, allowing beauty to evolve rather than be discarded. The front row was packed with fashion's elite, but Callista only had eyes for two people: Nathan, watching with undisguised pride, and Audrey, wearing a miniature version of one of the designs, practically glowing with excitement. The show was a triumph. Orders poured in from boutiques worldwide. Fashion bloggers praised the collection's innovation and social consciousness. But for Callista, the real victory came in a quiet moment backstage when Audrey threw her arms around her. "You did it," the child exclaimed. "You made beauty from nothing, just like you said." Over Audrey's head, Callista met Nathan's eyes. He mouthed, "I love you," and she realized that success wasn't measured in applause or sales figures. It was in these moments of connection, of chosen family, of love that transcended circumstance. Later that evening, they walked through Central Park, the same path where photographers had once captured them unaware. Now they walked openly, unashamed of their love, unbothered by the occasional camera flash. "I have something for you," Nathan said, producing a small velvet box. Callista's breath caught, but when she opened it, she found not a ring but a key. "It's to the studio space next to Design Collaborative," Nathan explained. "Patricia and I went in on it together. She wants you to launch your own line within the company. Full creative control, focusing on accessible luxury and sustainable fashion. Your vision, your way." Tears spilled down Callista's cheeks. "Nathan, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "Not because of me, but because you've earned it. Every investor who saw tonight's show wants in. This isn't charity, Callista. It's smart business." She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they pulled apart, Audrey was grinning up at them. "Does this mean we're going to be a real family now?" she asked with characteristic directness. Nathan and Callista exchanged glances, a whole conversation in a look. "We already are a real family," Callista said, kneeling to Audrey's level. "Families aren't just about marriage certificates or shared houses. They're about choosing each other every day, no matter what." "But," Nathan added, his hand finding Callista's, "if you're asking what I think you're asking, then yes. I'm going to ask Callista to marry me, if she'll have us." Callista stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Nathan's. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a promise of a proposal," Nathan said with a smile. "I want to do it properly, when it's just about us, not about proving anything to anyone else." 3 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Nathan proposed in the small coffee shop where they had reconciled after the media storm. No photographers, no fanfare, just the three of them and the elderly owner who had become fond of them over their many visits. Callista said yes, of course. Their wedding, held the following spring, was a blend of two worlds coming together. It took place at the Botanical Garden, with wildflowers mixed with exotic orchids, designer gowns alongside handmade dresses from Callista's neighborhood. The guest list included billionaires and bus drivers, fashion icons, and the women from Callista's mother's church. Audrey served as flower girl, ring bearer, and self-appointed wedding coordinator, bossing everyone around with such charm that even Margaret Ashford followed her directions. As Callista walked down the aisle, she saw her journey reflected in the faces watching her. There was Patricia, who had taken a chance on an unknown designer. There was the coffee shop owner, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. There were her mother's friends, proud as if Grace herself were watching. There were Nathan's business associates, who had learned to respect her strength. And there, at the altar, stood Nathan and Audrey, her chosen family, her unexpected happiness, her proof that love could bridge any divide if people were brave enough to try. The ceremony was simple but profound. When they exchanged vows, Callista included promises to Audrey, pledging to love and support her, to honor her mother's memory while helping create new ones. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden when Audrey wrapped her arms around both of them, declaring, "Finally." The media coverage was extensive but surprisingly positive. The narrative had shifted from gold digger to modern fairy tale, from social climber to American dream. Callista's success in fashion, coupled with her grace under pressure and devotion to Audrey, had won over even the skeptics. But the real measure of their success came in smaller moments. It was Audrey calling Callista mom for the first time, unprompted and natural. It was Nathan learning to embroider because he wanted to understand Callista's first love. It was family dinners where they discussed everything from stock portfolios to finger painting with equal enthusiasm. It was Callista establishing a scholarship fund for design students from underprivileged backgrounds, funded initially by her own earnings, not Nathan's wealth. It was Nathan stepping back from certain business ventures to spend more time with his family. It was both of them showing Audrey that love wasn't about perfection, but about choosing each other through imperfection. 1 year after their wedding, Callista's first independent collection debuted at New York Fashion Week. The line, called Grace after her mother, featured affordable luxury pieces that transformed based on how they were worn. A single dress could go from boardroom to ballroom with a few adjustments, embodying Callista's belief that beauty should be accessible and adaptable. The show was held in an unconventional venue, a renovated warehouse in Callista's old neighborhood. The contrast between the setting and the attendees created exactly the statement she intended. Fashion should exist everywhere, for everyone. As models walked the runway, each piece told a story of transformation. The final dress, worn by a model who bore a striking resemblance to Callista's mother, was made from fabric. Callista had been saving since college, her last connection to her design dreams before life intervened. When Callista took her bow, the applause was deafening. But she only had eyes for her family in the front row. Nathan was crying unashamedly, and Audrey was standing on her chair, cheering loud enough for 10 people. Backstage, amid the chaos of congratulations and interviews, Nathan pulled her aside. "Your mother would be so proud," he said softly. "She is," Callista replied with certainty. "I feel her here. She's in every stitch, every choice, every risk taken." "Speaking of risks," Nathan said with a mysterious smile, "Audrey has something to tell you." Audrey appeared, practically bouncing with excitement. "We're going to be 4. Callista's eyes widened as Nathan placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "I was going to wait to tell you, but 4 is perfect," Audrey interrupted. "I've already decided. If it's a girl, we name her Grace. If it's a boy, we name him after Grandpa. Either way, I'm teaching them everything." Through tears of joy, Callista laughed. "When did you become so wise?" "When you became my mom," Audrey said simply. 5 years after that first humiliating night at the restaurant, Callista stood in the same establishment, though now as an honored guest at a charity benefit she and Nathan were hosting. The restaurant had undergone a change in management, and the new owners had invited them to hold their annual fundraiser there, a fund supporting young designers and single parents pursuing education. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew their story. Marcus, the waiter who had once humiliated her, was long gone, but Callista had tracked him down and offered him a position in her company's customer service department. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she had told a stunned Nathan. Marcus had become one of her most loyal employees, his past cruelty transformed into fierce protectiveness. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed with purpose rather than pretension. Young designers displayed their work, scholarship recipients shared their stories, and Audrey, now 12 and poised beyond her years, gave a speech about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. "5 years ago," Audrey said, her voice clear and confident, "my dad met my mom in this room. People judged her for being poor. They judged him for being rich. They judged them both for choosing love over convention. But you know what? They were all wrong." She paused, her eyes finding Callista in the crowd, holding baby Grace while 4-year-old Samuel played with Nathan's cufflinks. "My mom taught me that strength isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up. My dad taught me that real power is in lifting others. Together, they taught me that family isn't about matching DNA or bank accounts. It's about choosing each other, defending each other, and growing together." The room erupted in applause, but Audrey wasn't finished. So tonight, as we raise money for people who just need a chance, remember, the woman you dismiss might be the next great designer. The man you judge might be grieving and lonely. The child you ignore might be the bridge between worlds. Every person has a story worth hearing, if you just take the time to listen. As Audrey left the stage to thunderous applause, Callista and Nathan exchanged looks of profound pride. Their daughter for Audrey was equally both of theirs, now had absorbed the best of them both. Later, as the evening wound down and the children dozed in Nathan's arms, Callista stood by the window where she had once sat alone with $5 to her name. Nathan joined her, shifting sleeping Grace to one arm so he could pull Callista close with the other. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Callista looked at her family, at the young designers excitedly discussing their futures, at the world they had built from a chance encounter born of kindness. "How could I regret the path that led me here?" she replied. "Every struggle, every humiliation, every tear, they were all stepping stones to this moment." "Even Marcus?" Nathan asked with a wry smile. "Especially Marcus," Callista laughed. "Without his cruelty, you might not have noticed me. Audrey might not have invited me to your table. We might have passed each other by, two lonely souls who never knew what they were missing." Nathan kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her perfume, the same one she'd worn on their wedding day, now a familiar comfort. "Fate has a strange sense of humor," he observed. "Or maybe," Callista suggested, "it just knows that the best things come from the most unexpected places." A $5 bill, a child's intuition, a moment of kindness between strangers. As they stood together, watching the city lights twinkle beyond the window, a young woman entered the restaurant, clutching her purse nervously, clearly out of place. Callista recognized the look immediately, the same mixture of pride and desperation she had once worn. Without hesitation, Callista approached her. "Excuse me, are you here for the benefit?" The young woman flushed. I thought it was open to the public. I'm a design student, and I heard about Mrs. Carter's work, and I just wanted to see." "Then you're exactly where you belong," Callista said warmly. "Come, let me introduce you to some people, and please, call me Callista." As she led the young woman into the party, Callista caught Nathan's eye. He was smiling that particular smile, the one that still made her heart race, the one that said he saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he saw. The circle was complete but never closing, always expanding to include others who needed what they had once needed: recognition, opportunity, and the transformative power of unexpected kindness. Years later, when business students would study the Carter Brown Foundation's unprecedented success in identifying and nurturing talent from overlooked communities, they would point to metrics and strategies and innovative funding models. But those who knew the real story understood the truth. It succeeded because it was built on the fundamental belief that everyone deserved to be seen, valued, and given the chance to rise. The autumn rain was gentle against the windows of the Carter estate as the family gathered for their weekly Sunday dinner. It had become a tradition as sacred as any religious observance. No business calls, no design deadlines, just family. Audrey, now 16 and as brilliant as she was beautiful, was regaling them with stories from her advanced placement art class. She had inherited Callista's eye for design and Nathan's strategic mind, a combination that her teachers found both impressive and occasionally intimidating. "Mrs. Morrison says I could get into Parsons or RISD easily," Audrey said, helping Grace set the table. "But I think I want to do a dual degree design and business. That way I can understand both sides of the industry." "Ambitious," Nathan observed proudly. "Just remember, there's no rush. You have time to explore." "Says the man who built a billion-dollar company by 30, Audrey teased. $8 billion, 7-year-old Samuel corrected, making everyone laugh. He had Nathan's head for numbers and Callista's artistic soul, often creating elaborate drawings filled with mathematical patterns. Grace, at 9, was the quiet philosopher of the family, possessing a wisdom that reminded Callista painfully and beautifully of her own mother. "Money isn't the measure," Grace said softly. "Love Island." "Out of the mouths of babes," Callista murmured, pulling her daughter close. As they settled around the dinner table, each member of the family shared their highlight of the week, another tradition that had evolved naturally. Samuel talked about his science project, Grace about the poem she'd written, Audrey about the dress she was designing for her best friend's birthday. When it was Callista's turn, she hesitated, then smiled. "I received a letter this week, from someone unexpected. Nathan raised an eyebrow, curious. Marcus, Callista revealed, the waiter from that night. The room fell silent. Even the younger children knew this story, the legend of how their parents met. He's getting married, Callista continued, to a woman he met at a community college where he's been taking night classes. He thanked me for the second chance, for showing him that grace was possible even when it wasn't deserved. You gave him a job after what he did? Audrey asked, incredulous. Everyone deserves redemption, Callista said simply. Besides, his cruelty led to the greatest joy of my life. How could I hold on to anger when I'm so grateful for the outcome? Nathan reached across the table to take her hand. You're remarkable. We're remarkable, Callista corrected. All of us. This family, this life, we built it together. As dinner continued with laughter and conversation, none of them noticed the figure standing in the rain outside, watching through the window. It was the same photographer who had captured those first images of them in the park years ago. But this time, he lowered his camera without taking a shot. Some moments, he had learned, were too precious to commodify. Some families were too real to reduce to headlines. He walked away, leaving them to their happiness, understanding finally that the real story wasn't about a poor girl who married rich or a billionaire who found love. It was about people who chose each other despite every reason not to, who built something beautiful from broken pieces, who proved that love could indeed conquer all, not easily, not without scars, but ultimately, triumphantly. Inside, warm and safe, the Carter family continued their dinner, blissfully unaware of the witness to their joy. Audrey was teaching Samuel a complicated napkin fold. Grace was sketching in her ever-present notebook. Nathan was stealing glances at Callista when he thought she wasn't looking, and Callista was memorizing every detail of this perfect, imperfect moment. She thought about her mother, about Nathan's first wife, about all the loss that had led to this abundance. She thought about $5 and humiliation, about kindness from strangers, about a little girl who had seen something worth saving in a broken woman. What are you thinking about? Nathan asked softly, noticing her contemplative mood. Beginnings and endings, Callista replied. How the worst night of my life became the first night of my real life. How sometimes we have to lose everything to find what really matters. No sad thoughts on Sunday, Grace declared with authority that belied her years. That's the rule. You're right, Callista laughed, shaking off her melancholy. No sadness here, only gratitude. As the evening progressed, they moved to the living room where Samuel performed his latest piano piece. Grace read her poem about butterflies and transformation, and Audrey showed sketches for her senior project, a collection inspired by resilience. Nathan and Callista sat together on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, watching their children with the satisfaction of people who had built something worthwhile. Do you ever think about that night? Nathan asked quietly. What would have happened if you'd walked out before I could stop you? Every day, Callista admitted, and every day I thank whatever force kept me in that chair just long enough for you to see me. I saw you the moment you walked in, Nathan confessed. There was something about the way you carried yourself proud despite everything. It reminded me that strength isn't about what you have, but who you are. Smooth talker, Callista teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. Daddy's crying again, Samuel announced cheerfully. He always cries when he looks at Mom like that. Those are happy tears, Audrey explained to her younger siblings. It's what happens when you love someone so much your heart can't contain it all. Nathan laughed, wiping his eyes. When did you become so wise? I had good teachers, Audrey replied, looking between her parents with love that bridged blood and choice, history and hope. As the children eventually dispersed to their rooms, homework and dreams calling them away, Nathan and Callista remained on the couch, wrapped in comfortable silence in each other. We should go back, Callista said suddenly. Back where? To the restaurant, on the anniversary, every year, to remember where we started and appreciate where we are. Nathan considered this, even though it was painful, especially because it was painful, Callista said. Pain taught us to value joy, struggle taught us to appreciate ease. We shouldn't forget those lessons. Then we'll go, Nathan agreed, and we'll take the children. They should know that their parents weren't always who they are now, that we had to fight for this happiness, and that it was worth every battle, Callista added. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain, the sound of their children preparing for bed, the life they had built humming around them like a perfectly tuned instrument. 10 years from that first meeting, They stood once again in the restaurant, but this time for a very different reason. Callista had purchased the establishment, transforming it into a training ground for aspiring chefs and servers from disadvantaged backgrounds. The emphasis was on dignity, respect, and the understanding that every patron deserved to be treated with equal courtesy regardless of their apparent wealth. The grand reopening was attended by everyone who mattered not in terms of social status, but in terms of their journey. Patricia Hoffman was there, now a close friend and godmother to Grace. Margaret Ashford, well into her 80s but still formidable, held court at a corner table, regaling young entrepreneurs with stories of the old days. Marcus, now a successful restaurant manager himself, had helped plan the evening. But the speech everyone remembered was Audrey's. Standing where her parents had first truly seen each other, she spoke about legacy and love, about the courage to be vulnerable and the strength to persevere. This place, she said, gesturing to the transformed space, is proof that nothing is permanent. Cruelty can become kindness, humiliation can become honor, strangers can become family. My parents didn't just fall in love here, they chose to rise in love, to lift each other up, to build something that could shelter others. She paused, finding her siblings in the crowd, Grace with her notebook, Samuel with his calculator, already figuring the night's proceeds for charity. We're not special because we have money now, Audrey continued. We're special because we remember not having it. We're special because every success is shared, every struggle is faced together. We're the Carter Brown family, not by blood alone, but by choice, by fight, by the refusal to let the world tell us who we're supposed to be. The room erupted in applause, but Audrey raised her hand for silence. So tonight, as we celebrate transformation, remember, every person who walks through those doors carries a story. Maybe they have $5 or $5 million. Maybe they're at their beginning or their end. Either way, they deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be given the chance my mother was given the chance to rise. As the evening wound down and the family stood together for photos, Callista reflected on the journey from that night of humiliation to this night of triumph. Every struggle had been a step, every tear had watered growth, every moment of despair had been the darkness before a brighter dawn. Nathan, sensing her thoughts, whispered in her ear, "No regrets?" "No regrets," she confirmed, then amended, "No, that's not right. One regret." He looked at her in surprise. "I regret that my mother couldn't see this," she said softly, "that she couldn't see how her sacrifice bloomed into something beautiful." "She sees," Nathan said with certainty. "In Grace's wisdom, in your strength, in the lives you've changed, she sees, and she's proud." As if in confirmation, a warm breeze swept through the restaurant despite the closed windows, carrying the faint scent of jasmine, Grace Brown's favorite flower. Callista smiled, tears streaming down her face, and knew that some presences transcend absence, that some loves outlive loss. The photographer from years ago, now a family friend, captured the moment, the Carter Brown family, complete and complex, standing in the place where their story began, proof that fairy tales don't always start with once upon a time. Sometimes they start with $5, desperate pride, and the decision to see beyond surface to soul. The true measure of their success wasn't in the headlines or bank accounts, the fashion awards or business accolades. It was in the quiet moments, Sunday dinners and homework help, tears comforted and dreams encouraged. It was in the extended family they'd created, the community they'd built, the lives they'd touched. As they left the restaurant that night, Audrey linking arms with her mother, Grace holding her father's hand, Samuel already asleep in Nathan's arms, they were just another family heading home. But they were also living proof that love could bridge any divide, that kindness could change trajectories, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the universe's way of positioning us for the best. The story that had begun with a poor black girl with only $5 for dinner had evolved into something richer than money could ever buy. A legacy of love, a testament to resilience, and a reminder that every ending is also a beginning, every loss a potential gain, every act of cruelty an opportunity for grace. The Carter Brown family drove home through city streets that had witnessed their journey, past the park where they'd walked as strangers becoming family, past the small apartment where Callista had once cried herself to sleep, past the coffee shop where Nathan had promised to propose properly. Each landmark was a milestone, each memory a building block of the life they'd constructed together. And as they pulled into their driveway, the house lights welcoming them home, They knew that their story, improbable, impossible, but absolutely true, would continue to unfold in ways they couldn't imagine. Because that's what happens when love refuses to recognize boundaries, when kindness transcends circumstance, when a moment's compassion becomes a lifetime's commitment. It creates something new, something necessary, something that reminds us all that we're more alike than different, more connected than separate, more capable of transformation than we ever dared believe. The poor black girl with $5 had become a successful designer, wife, and mother. The single dad CEO had become a partner who understood that true wealth wasn't measured in billions but in belonging. The lonely little girl had become a confident young woman who would carry forward the lessons of unlikely love. And together, they had become what they'd each been searching for without knowing it: home.